Good afternoon. As always, we welcome you to this shared space at the Rhinebeck Reformed Church, where we are extremely excited and proud to co-host an event with the Jewish Federation of Dutchess County. And we're delighted to have a remarkable author today lead us in a co-conversation, a dialogue about a wonderful book he wrote titled Kind of a Big Deal, which Oblong will have available for you after the presentation or the conversation, and the author would sign it for you and chat with you further. In a world fraught with so much sadness and division, it's remarkable or reassuring to know that we can build community through storytelling, especially stories that are layered with humor. Saul Austerlitz is a gifted and remarkable storyteller. He is a professor that traces the history of humor at NYU University, which I think is one of the coolest jobs in the world. He was educated at Yale and holds an MFA from NYU. He lives in Brooklyn with his family. His prolific writing has appeared throughout many media outlets, including the New York Times, the New Republic, the Los Angeles Times, the Boston Globe, and we are in for a treat. So without further ado, I will defer this part now to the fabulous Karen Haukhauser and Saul Austerlitz. Welcome.
So we welcome you. This is so funny. I normally don't use a microphone because I'm told I have a very projecting voice, but we're trying to do this officially so that way everybody can hear, and that way we can hear your laughter back when we tell bad jokes. Just kidding, just kidding. But we often say, if we don't laugh, we cry. In today's environment, there's a lot of hate, there's a lot of anti-Semitism, but we are here together, we are stronger together, and we welcome you all. So I'm Karen Haukhauser, Executive Director of the Jewish Federation of Dutchess County. Very honored to be back at the Rhinebeck Reformed Church, working with Pastor Luis. And over there in the green dress, who's looking beautiful, is Amy, who will be launching a book club. So this is going to be the precursor, so talk to her later more about that. But we work together on this event. And I'm very honored to introduce Saul. Isn't that a movie, My Name is Saul, or something about Saul? It's a different genre. And I have to admit, I'm a total geek when it comes to comedy and physical humor. So Anchorman, when I heard about it, I'm like, oh my God, and I started doing all the quotes, because you quote all the movies, like, stay, San Diego, stay classy, and I have a whole bunch of them. So we're going to get to all of that. But going back to even the movie, so NYU, I happen to have my master's from NYU, so yay, purple, I don't know. I was working full time, I got the master's. But it's interesting because me being a student, the students today, I wanted to first start by, when you teach this class, tell us how you start it every time.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks so much for having me here. I started teaching this class in 2016. And I think one of the goals that I had was just to get my students to think a bit more about comedy and a little bit more deeply about comedy. Comedy often gets short shrift. It's treated as kind of the sad sack younger sibling of drama. We don't give it the big prizes. It doesn't get the thoughtful reviews. It gets treated as like, yeah, it made me laugh, but that's all I need to say about that. And so, I love Anchorman and always have, and I think I chose it in part as a little bit of a provocation that students might come in with preconceived notions of, this is a funny movie, but it's very disposable, and it made me laugh, but there's nothing further that I need to say about it. And instead to get them thinking about some of the themes that are in the movie, whether it's stuff related to the story of comedy, like how Saturday Night Live plays an impact in how Anchorman gets made, or whether it's thematic in terms of the way that the movie is a commentary on feminism or about news culture, television news, and just to sort of see some of the different paths that are available as fledgling commentators or critics of popular culture, to see that even this movie that you may think of as being relatively empty laughter is actually contains all of this other stuff. And obviously, I picked the movie, so I'm cheating the system a little bit. I know that the stuff is in there.
You're guiding.
I'm guiding my students. And so I taught this class for years until I got to the point where I realized, oh, I actually have things that I want to say about Anchorman. I don't just want my students to think about it more deeply. I want to get into more detail about how it got made, why it got made, and also what some of the themes that I see running through the film. So it's been a fun, ongoing process for me.
Excellent. And we will talk about some of those themes, but by a show of hands, who has not seen Anchorman? Really, Dad? All right. I know what we're doing next week. All right, so because of that, we are going to show the trailer, and I will be laughing out loud literally because it's just funny. Now, nobody can make any comments about how many windows I have open as I share over this tab. I've shut down a whole bunch, but no comments. Okay, so let us go. This is kind of fun.
There was a time when people believed everything they heard on TV. This was an age when only men were allowed to read the news. And one anchorman was more man than the rest.
Good evening. I'm Ron Burgundy.
Damn it! Who typed a question mark on the teleprompter? Hey, Garrett, how's the divorce?
Oh, not so good. I'll probably never see my kids.
Fantastic. I'm not lonely.
I'm beloved by everyone in San Diego. You're so wise. You're like a miniature Buddha covered in hair. What are your hopes? What are your dreams? What are your passions?
To be the first female anchor.
And I'd like to be king of Australia. Seriously, you sound like an insane person.
I just got a call from network, and the decision has been passed down to make Veronica our co-anchor. No! Leave me alone. I love the ladies, but they don't belong in the newsroom. It is anchor man, not anchor lady. I don't know what we're yelling about.
What if just for tonight we weren't co-workers, we were co-people? Oh, I'm storming your castle on my steed.
We should keep it relatively quieter in the station.
Absolutely. I'd also like to share with you that we are currently dating, and that she is quite a handful in the bedroom.
Knights of Columbus, that hurts.
What are you doing on our station's turf, Burgundy?
Come get a taste.
You took a bullet from me.
And I would not do that again. It hurts like a mother.
Take me right now.
Let's make a baby.
All right, so it's kind of a big deal. And what we'll do we're going to show some different clips. Okay, we're going to show some different clips in, and what I'm going to do is going to try and get out of the PowerPoint so you can see it full screen. What do you think about that? Without me dropping my pages and hopefully not saying any explicitives, but they say it in the movie, so it's okay. So anyway, that is kind of an overview of, and I can see some people going, I don't get it. It just looks, what? So tell us, when did you start incorporating this in your class?
Yeah, I started incorporating it as soon as I started teaching about 8 years ago. And I think it's a movie that translates well to that because it's so silly and so over the top. I find that for my students, interestingly, Saturday Night Live is still a real point of reference. Students will watch it every week. They'll come in talking about the sketches. And Anchorman is not an SNL movie in the sense that it's not based on a sketch from the show, but Adam McKay, the director and co-writer of the movie, was the head writer on the show. Will Ferrell obviously also got a start on SNL. And the ethos of SNL feels very strong here. This isn't an SNL sketch, but it very much feels like it could have been one, in the sense of kind of coming up with a particular comic idea and then providing a series of variations on it, right? So the idea of, let's look at sort of the bad old days of television newscasting, going back to the 1970s, and then just kind of watching Ron Burgundy, the character played by Will Ferrell, and all of his friends, adjusting very poorly to the idea of feminism or a woman being in their professional space. It very much has that SNL feel, and so I think that's part of what students connect with.
Because it's Anchorman, not Anchor Lady. So it's kind of funny because you mentioned SNL, and SNL has been a forever type of theme, and invariably they're like, oh, you're never going to survive, you're never going to, but it still survives and it's still there. So for over the years you've been teaching, how do you find the students to be different? We're watching what's going on in college campuses. We just watched the movie, going to totally forget what it was, American something, where this one student was complaining about something that the actual teacher said, if I can handle it, you should be able to handle it, and then American Fiction, there you go. But I won't go into the details of that, but you've seen it, so you know. So how, as a professor, and NYU has been known for being interesting recently, how have you seen your students change, and how has that maybe impacted your class?
Well, first of all, let me say that one of the main ways that I've taken note of my relationship with my students is just a reminder of how old I am. So one of the other things I show in my class is an episode of Sex and the City. And a few years ago, which I still think of as a contemporary show because I'm an old person. And so a few years ago, one of my students, who wasn't trying to be rude in any way, just sort of saw what we were looking at that day and said, oh, Sex and the City. Yeah, my mom used to like that show when I was a kid. It's like, great, thanks so much for that. Yeah, I find, obviously I know what you're referring to, I find that the atmosphere in the classroom is still very open-minded and still very loose, maybe in part because it's about comedy, although, you know, there's been a real kind of overhaul or rethinking of what kind of makes for good comedy or what makes for appropriate comedy. And so I think my students are often people who've been thinking about that a great deal. A lot of them are aspiring stand-up comedians or aspiring comedy writers, and so these are topics that are close to their hearts. So I think that any kind of comedy that feels mean-spirited in the sense of sort of kicking down at someone, they're not going to be as comfortable with. But, you know, so we end up spending a fair amount of time in the classroom talking about people like Dave Chappelle and other stand-up comedians who seem to be adjusting less well to this new environment and intent on telling the same kinds of cruel and often mean-spirited jokes as if to prove like, oh, I have the freedom to tell these jokes, therefore I have to tell these jokes. And that doesn't always go over well, but I find that in general, the atmosphere feels very open-minded and open to a wide variety of comedy. Sometimes in like a political sense in terms of what students are amenable to, and sometimes in the sense that I'm sort of pushing students to look a little bit further into the past. So we look at, you know, a Charlie Chaplin film, which is not, you know, black and white silent films are generally not the strong suit of 19-year-olds, but they end up, maybe just to be polite, but they end up, I think, liking it more than they might have expected to.
Or maybe they had really cool parents who showed them that stuff. I can tell you, if I brought my kids in here, they can quote different things from Anchorman, Talladega Nights. I mean, we just go on and on. It's kind of a cult classic. If you take it, as you said, on one level of just, okay, it's sort of funny, ha-ha, but then when we delve in, which we'll delve in a little later, about really what some of the lessons are for society, for us, that gets more deep and profound. That's so funny. One of the questions, what are some of your key impressions when you first watch the film? And that's when I typically go like, or like, it could be a pterodactyl, it could be, I'm quoting Airplane, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I remember loving the movie when I first saw it in the theaters and feeling like Will Ferrell was a performer to be reckoned with. I think one of the interesting things that I came across in doing some of the research for this book was that, I ended up talking to people who had worked with Will Ferrell in sort of previous incarnations when he'd been at SNL, and even before that when he'd been part of the Groundlings comedy troupe in Los Angeles. And the recurring theme was that every time Will Ferrell stepped into the room, people just assumed that, oh, this guy is going to be the mediocre person in the group. This is the one who's not going to be funny, who's just here because someone was polite to him. And at each step of the way, he's friendly, he's nice, he doesn't sort of take up a lot of space. And then suddenly, when it was time to perform, everyone realized, oh, I've made a giant miscalculation, that, he is willing to go to 10, even when it's just a bunch of people sitting in a room and preparing for a show, that no matter what, he just gives it his utmost and has these enormous comic reserves. And I think that's Anchorman is sort of his coming out party for the larger populace in some ways, by virtue of seeing just what he can do, that he can be that funny, that he can take up that much space on the screen.
And I don't remember, Anchorman was before the Talladega Nights, Step Brothers. It is a great genre. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about changing times. And as we said, it's Anchorman, not Anchor Lady. But I want to actually be able to see what we're doing. So what I'm going to do is I am going to show you the next clip while I talk through it, so that way you think I know what I'm doing. I'm joking, I know what I'm doing. Okay, so in this How I Roll scene.
It's delicious, but it is filling. Anthony, clip!
What the hell, bro?
Hello, neighbor.
Did you just throw a burrito out your window?
I believe I did.
What, are you high or something?
Whoa.
Did you see what happened?
I did see. That was a terrific little spill. That's quite a raspberry.
That's my chopper you just thrashed, bros of.
Easy, compadre. I'm your friend out here, all right?
I want you to fix my chopper before I stop your goopy ass.
If you want to throw down in fisticuffs, fine. I've got Jack Johnson and Tom O'Leary waiting for you, right here.
You destroyed the only thing I love. All right, there it is. What do you love?
I love poetry. And a glass of scotch. And, of course, my friend Baxter here.
Well, guess what? Now this is happening.
Excuse me. Excuse me. What are you doing?
That's how I roll. Baxter. Huh? Where the hell is he? He'll be here. I thought he was Mr. Dependable. I put brick on, but unless he's tracking the storm front, he's completely useless.
Excuse me, gentlemen.
Hello.
Just want you to know that if Ron does not show up, I am ready to go on.
Sweetheart, you and I have had this discussion 1,000,000 times. There's never been a woman anchor.
Mr. Harkin, this city needs its news.
Oh.
And you are going to deprive them of that because I have breasts, exquisite breasts. Now, I am going to go on, and if you want to try and stop me, bring it on. Because I am good at 3 things: fighting, screwing, and reading the news. Now, I've already done one of those today, so what's the other one going to be, huh?
Screwing?
I will be in makeup.
A special welcome to John Stamos.
One as well, which we're not going to watch right now because that'd be too much. Can't give you too much. Gotta keep you entertained. And I did hear the laugh, literally laugh out loud. So very good for all of you who did. Mary, I think it was you, and I love you for it. That's why. See, I can give you the microphone. You can be the comedy relief. So this is and based on the show, this is the first ever anchor person. So tell us a little bit about those impressions about changing times.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting and notable that this film, which was made in 2004, is set in the 1970s. And I think one of the reasons for that is that it gives us and the audience more permission to laugh, right? That if this was a movie from 2004, set in 2004, where we're surrounded by a bunch of sexist dinosaurs, it might be a little bit harder for us to find it humorous. And so putting it in the 70s is already our collective repository of all of our bad cultural things, our bad fashion choices, our bad cars that we used to drive, all of that stuff. And so it gives us a little bit of space from it so that we are allowed to laugh. And I think interestingly, this movie actually has its start in sort of real 1970s newscasting roots. One night Will Ferrell is flipping channels on TV and he comes across an A&E biography episode about the 1970s newscaster Jessica Savage. And as he's watching, he sees one of Savage's former coworkers, an anchor named Mort Krim, talking. And he's very casually and offhandedly saying, well, at that time we were all a bunch of male chauvinist pigs. And a little light bulb goes off over Will Ferrell's head where he says, this could be something. We could work with this, maybe. And he calls Adam McKay, and they had another project that they'd been working on for a long time that hadn't come to fruition. And Will Ferrell says, what do you think about this? And so interestingly, the first version of this screenplay that they come up with involves a plane full of newscasters who are flying to a newscasters convention in Philadelphia, but the plane crashes. And the survivors end up resorting to cannibalism in order to survive. And they're also being attacked by orangutans with throwing stars who occasionally kill them. This is actually the first draft of the film. So the movie goes through a variety of permutations, but that original nugget of there's something funny about 1970s newscasters, and maybe there's something funny sort of just in general about male chauvinism that we can undermine. That's kind of at the root of what's happening here.
So jumping into the fact why we're here, about kind of a big deal, tell us how and when did you decide to write the book?
Yeah, I started working on this book in about 2021.
It's a COVID thing.
Basically, yeah. And it took about a year and a half. I ended up getting to speak to a lot of the crew members who'd worked on the film and people who had worked with Will Ferrell and Adam McKay in their previous kind of sketch comedy work. And eventually I also got to speak to both Will Ferrell and Adam McKay. So it was great for me because I got to learn more about their experiences and also about the nature of how they made this film. And I think one of the things that's worth noting as being somewhat revolutionary in terms of how comedy gets made is that it was really important, especially to Adam McKay, but also to Will Ferrell, that they incorporate improvisation into making this movie. Now, Anchorman's not the first movie ever to use improvisation, but in general, improv is thought of as being more of a theatrical thing or more of like a sketch, a television kind of thing. It's very expensive to improvise while you're making a movie. You have to have the cameras roll. You're literally burning money while you're doing it. But Adam McKay had his roots in doing this kind of work and felt like if he brought in the right people, the right performers, that magic could happen that he wouldn't be able to come up with just by sitting in front of the page and writing. And one of his thoughts was that he shared with the performers was you're never going to be as funny or have as clear a mind in terms of how to make this the best scene possible as when it's on the day. When you're in your costume, when you're standing in front of the sets, when you're seeing the other performers, your mind will just be clicking at a better level. And he really encouraged everyone involved with the film. They shot it as is. They shot the script that they had written. And then once they had done that for each scene, he really wanted to give them all the opportunity to try things in different ways. So sometimes he would call out lines and say, try this. And sometimes he would just leave it to them and say, do it however you think makes the most sense. And I think we see the results of that in a lot of ways here by virtue of how freewheeling the movie feels, and how much of the material ends up being stuff that the actors just emerge with on their own.
Well, we'll talk about that experience, speaking with him and meeting with him, because I'm a groupie, I guess, in terms of that. It just seems like amazingly cool. And I wonder if there are outtakes, of all these different things. That'd be kind of a whole nother offside movie that would be interesting. But aside from having a love of this and it being COVID, what inspired you or prompted you to write the book?
I think I particularly wanted to write about more contemporary comedy. There hadn't been a lot that had been written about the film comedy of the last 20 years, let's say, which felt like a real kind of golden era of comedy, with its own limitations. I think that Anchorman sort of carves out a path for a lot of the comedies that follow. They're often movies about kind of men who are boys, boys who are men who haven't figured out how to grow up yet. I think most of them. Right, and I think that Anchorman is slightly different from many of those other films by virtue of having the character of Veronica Corningstone, played by Christina Applegate, who plays a major role here, who isn't just sort of the girlfriend or wife or other female figure who's there only to serve in a kind of secondary role of telling the man to grow up. But I do think that having said that about those comedies and about what their limitations are, there was this kind of freewheeling atmosphere of all these different gifted performers working together in all these different permutations. And I think one of the things that we might take note of, especially from the last 5 years, let's say, is that film comedy has really shrunk a lot. They don't make as many comedies as they used to. They don't get the kinds of promotion that they used to. And so, I'm hopeful that it's not the case, but it's definitely possible that the era of film comedy has somewhat come to an end. And so, writing about Anchorman in that vein, in terms of sort of talking about this particular era of film, from roughly Anchorman to roughly Bridesmaids, as being kind of a particular, possibly last golden era of film comedy, was very appealing to me.
I didn't like Bridesmaids. I gotta admit, I'll own it. I'm told I'm authentic, so I'll tell you what I think. But you've got Melissa McCartney, and some of the stuff she writes I find her very funny. So hopefully there's a whole nother wave of, because really there better be. And it's interesting because, as you said, like in that one scene that we just saw, Jack Black was in it. And as you watch and you're looking in the back, you're like, oh my gosh. In some of the other scenes, all of a sudden Jim Carrey's there. And it's just amazing the level of talent that they got to be in this film. And I wonder if they all, when getting together, be like, this is just fun. It's like we're hanging out with our own type and doing whatever we want. But for the book, what audience did you have in mind when you wrote it?
So I've gotten the chance to write a fair amount about comedy in the last few years, and I know that there's a world of diehard comedy fans like yourself who enjoy kind of understanding the ins and outs of how the sausage gets made comedy-wise. And I find that the stories involved with the writing of comedy and the performing of comedy are always fascinating. And so I was hoping that there would be people who'd be interested. I know how deeply people are connected with Anchorman and with Will Ferrell and with this particular era, and so that was sort of what got me going here.
You mean it wasn't just to be able to talk to him? Oh, and for the record, one of the 4 Anchormen is Paul Rudd, who has a house in Rhinebeck, and he did invite him. I don't see Paul here, so sad tear, but maybe when we give him the recording and he realizes what he missed out with this great group, he'll be like, sorry, I wasn't there. Speaking about different comedy and what you can and can't make. So, Blazing Saddles. Love the movie. Kids love the movie. So inappropriate on so many levels and probably could not be made today. So as you think about this question, I'm going to show another thing about changing times, but how does Anchorman and humor transcend generations? So let me hold that, you hold that.
one word you said. Ron, are you okay? Ron. Ron, where are you? I'm in a glass case of emotion. Look, he's gonna put Corning Stone on. He's gonna put Corning Stone on. I've got to do it now.
You're not Ron.
Run in 10. Good luck, lady. Ready to announce.
Roll in.
On the slim. And you're gone.
And your reporter in the field, Brian Santana. It's Channel 4 News at 6 o'clock.
Good evening. Ron Burgundy is off tonight. I'm Veronica Cornerstone. Tonight's top story.
Okay, we're off and running.
Wearing ski masks made off with over $20,000 from an area bank in a daring early morning robbery. And the winner of the frog leaping contest was Hoppy, with a jump of 7 feet 10 inches. I used to date a guy named Hoppy down in Alabama. He was quite a jumper, too. Well, that'll do it for us at 6 o'clock. From all of us here at Channel 4 News, I'm Veronica Corningstone. And thanks for stopping by, San Diego.
More. We have some more. Don't worry. I'm not gonna. You gotta stay. You gotta stay. What is it? You come for the this and you stay for the that, or you take you leave the gun and take the cannolis. See, we can go all day on these. Okay, so changing times, and we saw that this was kind of we're laughing, but this was a reality for many. So you go.
Yeah, I think there is a kind of realistic undercurrent here, right? So one of the things I write about in my book is sort of this. I pose this imaginary question of what would it look like to tell this same story about Veronica Corningstone, but have it be a drama, right? That there is a kind of dramatic undercurrent here. That the story is functionally Veronica's, right? It's about a young, up-and-coming female newscaster who's exposed to the sort of horrific sexism of this environment that she's thrust into. The movie obviously is intent on making it a comedy, but I think it's notable that it is notable when you take a look at it to see how carefully the movie is structured, right? That in each of the showdowns, in each of the arguments, in each of the debates, Veronica always gets the last word. She always gets the last punch in if that's what's necessary. And the movie is carefully structured so that even though Ron is sort of the functional center, he doesn't really get the best of her at all. And so I think that is part of what allows the movie's humor, which is so kind of based in this sexism, to still be funny. I do think that some other aspects of the movie maybe haven't aged quite as well. I think that there are sometimes jokes in the movie that feel a bit more homophobic and that are maybe a little bit less carefully thought out, but I do think that kind of coming back to this idea of comedy not necessarily being carefully, critically apprehended, that Anchorman was underrated at the time for the care and precision that it used in terms of calibrating its jokes so that we were laughing at these situations and not laughing at sexist people being sexist.
And it's interesting you talk about the sort of potentially homophobic side, but you do in your book write about the relationship of Champ and Ron Burgundy. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so you had mentioned earlier this idea of wouldn't it be nice if we could see all the outtakes. The amazing thing about Anchorman is that A, you can, and B, it is an entirely different movie. So if I'm now sort of referencing somewhat out-of-date media, but if you get the DVD of Anchorman.
What's a DVD?
I know. Check with somebody here. You can actually see a film called Wake Up Ron Burgundy, which is composed entirely of outtakes from Anchorman. It's a full-length film. It's like 75 or 80 minutes long. It has no overlap with Anchorman. It's all different takes, different scenes from the film that were cut. And it's this kind of fascinating experiment because, as it turned out, we saw a little bit of it actually when we looked at the trailer. There are scenes from the trailer that are not in the movie. And the reason why is because there had been an entirely different subplot to the film in which Ron and the news team are sort of go up against this crew of somewhat countercultural, radical, like violent radicals called the Alarm Clock, who end up kidnapping Veronica, and like this whole subplot ends up getting cut from the film because it was good, but it wasn't all that funny. And the editor of the film, Brent White, realized he had 40 minutes of film that he had already edited that was like in, fully completed shape. And he said, obviously I think it would be fun if audiences could see it, but it would be nice if I could round this out and kind of add to it. And so he ended up, as a kind of experiment, building out this other film called Wake Up Ron Burgundy. With all this other brilliant stuff from the film, you can see why each piece doesn't necessarily fit into Anchorman itself, but it's this wonderful opportunity to kind of get into the head of what an editor does, or like what goes into the editing process. And especially for a movie like this that was improvised, right, where not only is the editor's challenge to say, okay, here are 10 takes of the same line, which one is the best, but to say, here are 10 different lines that the actors performed here. Which one not only is the funniest, but which one makes the most sense here? And so I think it just kind of adds to the incredible opportunity and challenge of making a movie like this, that there's so much to work with that you could literally make a second movie out of the stuff that gets left on the floor.
Well, that may have to be a follow-up event if the Rhinebeck Reformed Church invites us back, and we'll find this film, and you know what? We can popcorn. You guys look like you're comfortable, so we can have another whole movie night here. Ooh, that's something we haven't thought about. Okay, here's a serious question. Okay. The book covers a wide variety of aspects of the film, including the making of the film, the costumes, period humor, connections with femininity, masculinity. Tell us more about how you organized the book and why you decided to take on the wide variety of angles. Because similar to a film that has so many different ways it could go, I think a book could be that way. I'm always impressed with authors. If you think about it, there's a blank page, and an author somehow has enough going up here that gets words that becomes an actual story. It's very impressive. So, as you have done that multiple times, share with us.
So I definitely knew that I wanted to delve into sort of the thematic side, like we've been talking about, looking at the movie's relationship to the feminist movement, looking at the movie's relationship to thinking about the 1970s, thinking about news culture, the way that the movie kind of tackles the limitations of television news is kind of a secondary theme here. But if you take a look at Anchorman 2, the sequel, it's like very much kind of like the blaring siren of the movie, is that it's about cable news and all of cable news's challenges and the ways in which it kind of distorts the world. So I knew I wanted to do all of that. And then I also have found over the course of writing a few of these books that oftentimes speaking to the kind of secondary crew members give you the best stories. And they haven't already told their stories 100 times, and it's just fascinating to hear about kind of what goes into their work. So I love talking to the costume designer on this movie. His name is Deborah McGuire. As it happens, my previous book, Generation Friends, was about the television show Friends. So she was the costume designer on that, and then also on this. So I interviewed her for both projects. And just hearing what goes into the sort of behind the scenes process of figuring out what each character is going to wear. What kind of hat is Champ going to wear? She told me a great story about how when she was dressing Will Ferrell, his name is Ron Burgundy, right? So she was like, well, obviously he has to wear a burgundy suit. And so she, put him in a few different suits, took photos, showed them to the director, Adam McKay, and he said, this all looks great, but I don't like the red suit. It's like, he has to wear the red suit. Like, let's at least try it in front of the cameras. And as soon as they did, he came to her and said, mea culpa, you're obviously right. Like, the burgundy suit is a necessity. I also got to talk to the production designer, whose name is Jan Pascal, who's gone on to win Oscars for movies like Mank, and just sort of hearing her describe the process of going through these Hollywood repositories of various odds and ends that she could put on screen was fascinating. So for those of you who've seen the film, there's a scene where Paul Rudd's character opens up like his cabinet of weird musks that he wants to put on. And so she told me that she was walking around and seeing this like fake, it's like I guess it's like a fake bookshelf that's in a picture frame. And her first thought on seeing it was, who would ever want to buy this for anything? And then her second thought was, this is perfect for this character. So, you know, those kinds of stories I find just fascinating and help me to understand that, you know, you have the sort of bold-faced names who make the movie, the Adam McKays and Will Ferrells and Paul Rudds, but oftentimes the best parts of movies come from the people whose names are not familiar, who put their hearts and souls into figuring out all the little details that can take a good movie and make it a great movie.
So for those with that magic thing that opens up, he's got like 17 different musks, like, oh, which one are you gonna try? And he goes, no, the tiger one, the jaguar, and he puts it on, and Ron's like, that's really pungent, and because he's trying to hit on Veronica, and then he goes over to the describing, because I don't think we have the clip, and he goes over, she's like, is that like a diaper 7 days old with Indian food in it? Like, he goes, well, some people think that that's sensual. Like, it was just very ridiculous in the machoism of it, but yeah, it was a really funny scene. What was a research process? You've told us a little bit about writing the book, and tell us how it was like meeting. I mean, you said the secondary were kind of the more fun ones, but you also did get to speak to Will. So just give us a little insight of that, and then we'll show another scene.
Yeah, so, you know, the less enjoyable but totally necessary part of writing books like these is chasing people down to get them to talk to you. So it was definitely a process. With Adam McKay, it took about a year to set up the interview. So, you know, I think part of the challenge, is that it's often a little bit of an uphill battle to convince people who are regularly being asked to be interviewed to cooperate for a book where it feels less like they're not promoting a 20-year-old film, so like, why am I doing this? So I think with Adam McKay, it ended up being a really enjoyable experience. I think in part because I realized that I didn't want to ask him all the same questions he's already been asked. So I by virtue of doing the research, I was able to read previous interviews and try to ask more specific questions that he hadn't already been asked a million times. And so we talked, and at the end of it, he said, oh, this was really fun, let's do some more, which was a very nice thing to hear. And with Will Ferrell, I actually didn't get to talk to him until the very end of the process. I'd already submitted my book, like the first draft of my book. And then finally, it came together that we were able to talk. I think one of the interesting things that I've taken note of, just as a sort of side note, is that there seem to be two different kinds of very funny people. Both Will Ferrell and Adam McKay are extremely funny. I find that some funny people, even in the course of an interview, which is more like serious business, I guess, still want to make you, like the interviewer, laugh and will do their utmost to win you over. And so Adam McKay was more in that vein, and he was hilarious. And some comedians who you know are extremely funny, they're all business when it comes to the end. So Will Ferrell was great and was so nice. And if you hadn't known who he was and were just sort of eavesdropping on our conversation, you would think he was like, you know, an accountant, basically.
Or was that just a role he was playing?
Could be.
Okay, so we were talking about the different changes, and it's science, because, you know, different things. So we are going to go back and watch another clip. And I do want to thank Saul. He was the one who provided these suggested links, so we're very excited about it.
I would like to be able to do my job.
Well, big deal. I am very professional.
Mr. Burgundy, you are acting like a baby.
I'm not a baby, I am a man. I am an Anchorman.
You are not a man. You are a big fat joke.
I'm a man who discovered the wheel and built the Eiffel Tower out of metal and brawn. That's what kind of man I am. You're just a woman with a small brain. With a brain a third the size of us. It's science.
I will have you know that I have more talent and more intelligence in my little finger than you do in your entire body, sir.
You are a smelly pirate hooker.
You look like a blueberry.
Why don't you go back to your home on Whore Island?
Well, you have bad hair.
What did you say?
I said, your hair looks stupid.
I'm working it out. It's between the two of them. Just talking. Look, just talking. I hate you.
I hate you more!
All right, stop. Stop what you're doing right now. I will not have my newsroom be divided. Ah! Knights of Columbus, that hurts.
Well, not only for the younger people in the crowd, not only a typewriter, but did you see at the end she pulled out, what was that thing called? A TV antenna that you could use to beat people. Or apparently you have to like put foil on it to make it, I don't know, it was beyond my time. So I love physical humor because I know nobody's actually getting hurt. I was probably one of the few people who went to see the movie Kill Bill, and when she's like killing everybody, I'm in hysterics. The person I was with is like, there's something wrong with you, but I own that. So in this scene, I mean, the battle of the sexes and, you know, it's science. Tell us a little bit about more of this scene and how it impacts the viewers and your students.
Yeah, I find this scene to be really funny and also sort of at the heart of the movie in some ways, in part because this is the moment where Ron kind of trots out his most odious points of view, right, the it's science part. You know, he is playing to this male crowd, right, us and them. And I think one of the interesting things that happens here is that Veronica can give as good as she gets, and there's a kind of symbolic aspect to it here as well, right? That Veronica is literally taking the television antenna, the tools of their collective trade, and whipping him with it, right? So he, even in what feels like this sort of safe space for him, where, you know, he's in the newsroom where everyone already loves him for whatever reason that we don't entirely understand, even here he's being beaten by Veronica.
And rightly so. Says a strong woman. So just out of curiosity, in your opinion, especially this movie was made in 2004, looking back at the 70s, 2017 became the Me Too movement. We're now in, I was going to say 23, we're in 2024, so that's like, wow, 20 years. That's a long time for some of us. Do you feel this movie could be made today? Kind of going back to that Blazing Saddles, that it probably couldn't. It's now this, I find to be like cult classic. Those who love it, love it. Do you think it could be made today?
I think it probably could. I think that the tone might have to be a little bit different, and I think some of the points of emphasis might have to be a little bit different. I think it was lost on some of the critics and some of the audience at the time that this movie already was a kind of satire of sexism. Like, one of the ways I describe it in the book is that it anticipates the Me Too movement in some ways by depicting some of the themes and some of the the difficulties that Me Too was intended to overcome or to comment on. I think probably if you were to make an Anchorman-esque movie in 2024, you'd have to underline those themes a little bit more just to make sure the audience doesn't miss it. But I think it would still be possible to do something like this. But yeah, there'd probably be a little bit, there'd probably be a few more meetings among the producers of the film to make sure that everything was, safe.
I sort of roll my eyes. I'm very good at it. I've learned that. Of just sometimes you almost wonder if people are too sensitive. Not that there's not a reason for being sensitive, but sometimes there could be underpinnings. We say humor is applicable, or how is humor applicable in the world we live in today, especially during these uncertain times? And to quote the book, comedy, like democracy, is about coming together. So I'm going to show a clip that has the contrary to that while you think of a good answer for that. So hold on one sec, because this is again, I like the physical humor part.
Walking for 45 minutes.
Rick, I thought you said this was a shortcut.
Fantastic. Well, is it a shortcut or not? Okay. Jeez.
Hey!
Uh-oh. Here comes trouble.
Where you think the ladies went out for a little stroll, huh? Always go out walking around, talking things through.
Keep a tight perimeter.
Yes, sirree. Well. Ron Burgundy, Channel 4 News Team. Where's your mommy?
You back off, evening news team.
You know, I understand that they had to bring a female in. Change your diapers. Wipe the dribble away from your bubbling lips. Rub Vaseline all over your hiney and tell you that it's special and different from everyone else's.
Is it hiney?
Rick, get back over here. Did she tuck you in, Ronnie? Give you a little kiss on your forehead? Tell you everything's gonna be okay?
I've had enough of you, Mantooth. This is gonna end right here, right now. Let's dance, dickweed.
You wanna dance, Ronnie? I want a polka.
Come get a taste. Rick, where'd you get a hand grenade? I don't know.
All right, let's do this.
Hey!
If you're gonna have a fight, then don't forget Channel 2 News with me, lead anchor Frank Richard.
You dirtbags have been in third place for 5 years.
Yeah, well, you're about to be in dead place.
Not so fast, you ingrates. Public news team is taking a break from its pledge drive to kick some ass. No commercials, no mercy!
¿Cómo están, Dutchess? Spanish language news is here. Tonight's top story. The sewers run red with Burgundy's blood. Yeah.
Looks like we got ourselves a bilingual blood fest.
Now, before we do this, let's go over the ground rules. Rule number 1. No touching of the hair or face.
Of course.
And that's it! Now let's do this!
because I want to talk about for democracy, the important stuff, the Anchorman 2. Democracy, important stuff, Anchorman 2. So we'll let you do the serious, then we'll talk the Anchorman 2, because, you know, sometimes the sequel isn't as good, but guess what? I have another fight scene for you, so talk.
So sometimes as you're doing research, you discover things that seem hard to imagine. So as it turns out, Jay Johnston, who's an actor in this film, he's the guy in the gray suit who's standing next to Vince Vaughn in the fight scene. As I guess shortly before I started working on this book, it turned out that he was one of the people who had stormed the Capitol on January 6, 2021. And there was a whole, not, I guess funny isn't quite the right word for it, but for those of you who may remember, after this happened on Twitter, there was a citizen detective effort to kind of figure out who the people were. And so sometimes people would make jokes to sort of make light of it, like, isn't this so-and-so celebrity? And in this case, someone said, isn't that Jay Johnson? And then it turned out it was him. So I guess I got to thinking about some of finding that out really bothered me. Not because I had any real connection with Jay Johnston, not that I particularly cared about him or his work, but just the idea that someone who was involved with a film as joyous as this, that it brought happiness to so many people, could be involved with something so terrible and destructive, it really ate away at me. And I think it got me to thinking about some of the ways in which comedy and democracy feel similar. That they're both collaborative efforts. They both involve sort of finding the best in other people. They both involve working together with other people to build something that you couldn't build all by yourself. And so thinking about some of the ways in which comedy is fragile, right? That you have to be in the right frame of mind, you have to be with the right people, you have to find ways to kind of make this thing together. Also express some of the challenges that we're all having in this moment as well, right? That our democracy is fragile, finding ways to kind of get along together. So I think it was important to me to get to tell that part of the story and to think a little bit about some of the ways in which even a movie like Anchorman that we may sometimes dismiss can also reflect some of these larger trends or larger ideals that we want to have in terms of how we relate to each other.
And I do like quoting one of your quotes from the book. Everywhere we look, we can catch glimpses of Anchorman's impact and the ways in which the ideas and concerns have bled into the world, which is a back and forth of, you know, does humor mock life? Does life mock humor? Tell us about Anchorman 2, because typically sequels not as good, different messaging, same messaging. What should we take away from that?
Yeah, so, you know, like some of the other big comedies of the 90s and early 2000s, Anchorman kind of grows slowly. It makes about $75 million at the box office in 2004, which is very respectable, but, you know, it's really a movie that ends up finding an even larger audience once it's available on DVD, once it's on cable, and people kind of stumble across it themselves. Sometimes also people who watched it the first time and liked it realize that they love it after seeing it a second or third or fourth time. So, you know, and I think the other thing that's worth noting is we now recognize basically all of these performers, but at the time, you know, Paul Rudd was not a giant star. Steve Carell was someone that people knew from The Daily Show, but hadn't really yet become that kind of mega star that he would become. So you know, the footprint of the performers in the film really grows over time. And so as that happens, there's more and more discussion, or people keep asking, when are you making a sequel? Will you make a sequel? Are you making a sequel? And I think at first, the inclination for McKay and Farrell was, we did this already. I don't know that there's anything further to be done. But the more people asked, the more they started thinking about it. And so the first idea they had, interestingly, was they were thinking that they would make Anchorman 2 as a musical, like a theatrical musical that they would perform. Neither of them are particularly talented at music, so I don't know exactly how that would have worked. But they ended up having dinner with Josh Gad, who's one of the stars of the Book of Mormon. And he told them that they had workshopped the Book of Mormon for 4 years before starting to perform it. And so I think that put a little bit of a damper on their musical theater ideas. And so they ended up coming back to the idea of making it as a movie, and because everyone had become much bigger stars, even just paying everyone their salary to come in made it so that they were basically asking for like $70 million as a budget, and that was generally considered a non-starter. So the movie kind of flickered in and out of existence for a number of years, and eventually everyone agreed to take a little bit less upfront to make it happen. I think Anchorman 2 is an interesting movie. It's quite funny. It's not as good as this movie, but that's maybe an unfair burden to put on it. So like we had talked about earlier, it's sort of much more explicit in terms of being about the news media. So it bumps itself up from, this movie is somewhere vaguely in the 1970s, and Anchorman 2 explicitly is in 1980, right at the start of, CNN and cable news. And so it has some of the characters going to work for a CNN-esque cable news network. And I think, Adam Kay, for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with this work, has gone on to make more kind of dramatically oriented films like The Big Short and Vice about Dick Cheney and Don't Look Up. And I think sometimes his work gets treated as two totally different halves of his career, the comedy aspect, and then suddenly he becomes a dramatic filmmaker. And actually, when you look at the comedies, they often have a lot of sort of serious material in it. And so, Anchorman 2 is a completely ludicrous, over-the-top comedy in which Will Ferrell's character becomes blind and moves to a lighthouse and swims with whales, because that's just what happens in the movie. But also, it's really a satire of cable news. And so you can already see some of the ways in which McKay is transitioning from making comedies that have kind of drama hidden underneath to making dramas that are also really funny and that have all sorts of comedic material built into them.
And nowadays, everybody gets their news on TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram. So that'll be Anchorman 3. Respecting everybody's time, I do have another clip if you'd like, and I do want to open up if anybody has questions. So do we want to see one more clip?
Yes.
Okay.
See the whole movie.
We will. Don't worry. We will.
Oh, don't worry. 4 against 1. This will be over fast. Maybe not so fast. My news team. Thank God.
Ain't a day that will be or has been that we don't have Ron Burgundy's back.
Not a problem. When I'm done with these mutts, I'm gonna wipe my shoes on the curb. Oh yeah, Jack Lime? When I'm done with you, my mom's gonna pick me up and take me home.
Word! Here's a headline for you. Moronic Yank Wankerman gets a bloody good hiding from newsreader from a superior country. For we are the BBC News Service.
No, not now. Fall back, fall back. If y'all gonna get down, then Wesley Jackson and the MTV News crew went in. What's MTV? I think it's a venereal disease.
The most impressive video of the day, a new band called Burgundy Sucking Chest Wound.
It wouldn't be a battle without Jill Jansen and Wendy Van Peel from Entertainment News.
Entertainment news is an abomination.
Who are you wearing today? Oh, look, it's your own blood. Today's celebrity birthdays, none. Today's celebrity deaths, all you flicks.
I like the way they're put together.
I like fighting girls.
I like to hunt cowboys. You eat, you're gonna.
Hey! There's not going to be any fight without Scott Riles and the incredibly polite Canadian news team.
What about the French-speaking Quebec News? The real voice of Canada.
Give it a rest, eh?
Give me a break. They can't have news. Nothing happens in Canada.
We're going to mop the floor with you. We're going to put the boots to you. Sorry.
It's all right. We're gonna gouge your eyes out and kick your head in.
Sorry. I like your ginger ale.
Jeff Bullington, ESPN All Sports. Tonight's player today is me, extracting your spine from your dead body.
Holy There's a lot of news.
It's true, the market is becoming saturated.
Hey, the History Network wants in on this. Our news too. Only news told much later.
Wait a minute, is that the ghost of Stonewall Jackson with you?
Yes, it is. And the mighty Minotaur.
I don't know about this man. Minotaur isn't even history. He's mythology. Hey, let's not downplay the fact that that's the ghost of Stonewall Jackson.
May the Lord anoint this hallowed field of battle.
You guys got room in this battle for an old war horse? Mac 10, and what are you doing here? You're too old for this.
Well, you see, there's the thing. When there's an early moon, I almost feel like a stallion again.
He's on our side, right, Ron? He's a were-hyena.
I'm gonna call Michael Jackson. I got a video idea.
So that scene I do love on Anchorman too. Now that this is about the book, which is about the movies, is there anything you wish now you could have added to the book that you've learned or reflected on since it's been written?
Yeah, it's always fun. There are always people that you wish you had gotten a chance to interview, so I always think about what could be added from that. And it's always been fun to hear from audiences and people who've read it and understand how people relate to the film. And so I always enjoy getting to write about how people come to take movies or TV shows or works of popular culture into their heart and the ways in which it becomes part of their lives. And yeah, so I think hearing some of the stories that I've heard over the course of talking about this book, it would be amazing to get to incorporate that into the book itself.
That'd be kind of a big deal too. What do you hope readers will take away, or what takeaways from the book do you hope that they remember or keep to heart?
Well, I hope it's enjoyable to get to read about these performers and about what they made, and also hopefully as well to think a little bit about all of the effort that goes into making comedy, right? That comedy can be spontaneous in the sense of the improvisational work that we are talking about, but also just the sheer amount of labor and thought and care that goes into crafting even one of these jokes, I always find to be inspiring. And yeah, that's something that I always hope that audiences take away as well.
Since, as Pastor Louis started, we coming together as a community, religious, not religious, Jewish, Christian, all together, how do you feel comedy impacts or has a positive impact towards that?
So for me, it's been really nice to get to go back to movie theaters after being away for, a year or 2 years because of COVID. And I think one of the things that I find most kind of magical about being in a theater is that you really do have a kind of collective experience together with strangers you don't know, in a way that is fundamentally different from watching the same exact thing at home. And one of the most remarkable things that I find about comedy is that it really, it inspires a genuine response, right? Like, if you're laughing, it's because you genuinely feel, right? We can all politely chuckle if someone makes a bad joke, but that real kind of laughter, it only emerges when you really feel it. And so the experience of being together in a darkened theater, all having that same moment of taking joy and pleasure in something, I find that to be really wonderful. And I think in some ways it can be a kind of template for, how we can all get along or ways that we can all sort of find ourselves in a collective or a shared emotion.
Or in daylight as we're talking about comedy as well. See, now you're all stuck. Now you're all combined. We're all a community. Before, I'm just being respectful of people's time, I did want to sort of, before opening it up for questions, I love how you ended this book with, we turn to comedy to temporarily escape our troubles, to find community in the presence of others, also seeking to momentarily set down their burdens and take pleasures in laughter. In the face of so much that seeks to tear us apart, we can still, like Lou Schiavello, well, you'll have to read about in the book, look to comedy to find solace and communion. May comedy be a source of our future strength, giving us the courage to face our failings, chuckle at them, and imagine better. Here's to hoping we find more ways to make each other laugh. And with that, I really thank you. We will open it up, just don't worry, Jonah, but thank you for bringing us together to laugh together, especially, as we said, there's so much hate and anti-Semitism in the world, so if we don't laugh, we cry. Very happy to have you. We will open it up for a couple of questions. Jonah, you had your hand up first, so I will pass you the mic.
Thank you, this is great. I just came from down the road where at the Upstate Films there was I'll say a controversial situation with folks that you might say support Hamas and what's going on in Gaza as being sort of an anti-Israel, pro-Hamas situation. And some of us were there to show our support. Where I'm going with this is you can't help but walk from there to here with this burden of, and I thought, well, thank goodness I'm going to go see something comedic. And that begs the question of, is there anything that is off limits? I can't help but wonder if that it would have been more productive if Hamas and Jews were making fun of themselves in that room than what they were just doing. Is anything off limits for comedy?
I don't see any particular topic as being entirely off limits. I think that comedy itself is a kind of protected speech in the sense that if we think about a stand-up performer, right? Like a stand-up performer, even engaged in the most innocuous kind of material, is going to be saying things that most of us would not say to each other, right? Like we generally try to be as polite and respectful as we can to each other. We all obviously always fail at those things, but we're at least trying. And stand-up comedy and comedy in general allows people to sort of say sometimes mean or at least pointed things in ways that hopefully make us laugh or see our own foibles or our own failings. So I don't think that there's any topic that's necessarily off limits. I think there are different approaches to those topics that can be more or less challenging.
So I'll pull back the question.
Yeah.
I think what it really meant was, can it help fix any situation? Can you imagine comedy being applied to any situation to help bridge misunderstanding and bring people together?
And repeat the question.
Yeah, so the question was whether comedy can be applied to sort of bridge misunderstandings or bring people together. I think so. I don't think that comedy is like an automatic salve for all of the world's problems. I don't think it can resolve what's been happening in Israel and Palestine, but I do think that the idea that maybe we can sort of see ourselves in a somewhat different light or like laugh at our own failings or our own limitations, I think that always has a certain kind of power to it, and I don't think that comedy can resolve all of the world's problems, but I do take some comfort in the idea that maybe it can at least, turn the heat down a little bit.
I'm not excluding that side. I will like scan over so I know question, and Gwen, your 3 questions, and everybody else. Oh no, you're now at the bottom of the pile. Sorry.
Pile on me. At the beginning of the talk, you said that comedy, as it is, it seems to maybe dying or disappearing, and we all know actually that historically, comedy was supposed to be something that gave a relief to tension. I wonder whether the death of comedy is not a result of the opposite of what it was intended to be to begin with. Many of the comedians today are actually saying that it's no more fun for them to do any comedy because they have to watch every word they say, and depending on who is their audience, they may not know how, by the time they finish their shtick, what will be the results. Do you see that as a big problem, as the reason for that? A lot of the SNL material that started, and I just want to tie it in, slowly became a very one-sided, kind of comedy. So by that, it eliminated 50% of the population that every time they went on that set, they saw things that they perceived to be lies or jokes or about things that and the youngsters that of today have learned to trust, not to look at SNL not as a comedy, so as their news. So what extent do you think that is a problem?
I think as I woke up, the fact that most younger kids get their news from TikTok, that's a whole other level, but...
That's now, but SNL has been...
Forever.
SNL...
Even when you were young.
And shows like this have become their news source.
The Daily Show. Oh, my son, he gets his news from the day he used to.
So, to what extent that actually killed, comedy?
Yeah, so first of all, I think I wasn't being as clear as I should have been before. Comedy itself, I think, is very much alive, doing great. The thing that's changed is that I think that film comedy, meaning like feature films put out in the theaters, the footprint of comedy has shrunk a lot. And there are a lot of reasons why that's the case. A lot of them have to do with the financial aspects of the industry. So, as the film industry has changed, the sort of middle ground of film that used to be occupied by what I would loosely describe as like movies for adults has basically vanished. Sort of middle budget movies with familiar actors telling stories about people, those movies don't get made so much anymore. So you still have independent films that get made, you still have the sort of big budget Disney and Marvel type movies, and that whole middle ground has vanished. Talking primarily just about what gets put out in the theaters. We're talking about what gets put out in movie theaters as opposed to what's available to stream. And so comedy has suffered as a result also because the kinds of movies that studios want to make are mostly movies that have intellectual property that's familiar, right? Superheroes, Star Wars, things like that where everyone knows what it is already. Comedy can't really have that, right? You could have an Anchorman 2, a sequel or something like that where people are already familiar, but most of the time comedy doesn't really fit that bill. And also, the other problem for comedy is that comedy, these kinds of giant budget movies, they require movies to be internationally successful to make any money. Comedy does not travel well. It's hard for jokes in one culture to work well in another culture. Sometimes they're literally untranslatable, and so comedy historically has not always done very well. In regards to your sort of larger question about how comedy seems to be doing, I hear what you're saying. I've definitely heard some of the same concerns that you've heard from certain stand-up comedians or other performers. I think it's somewhat overstated. I do think that inevitably in any era there are going to be comedians who have been very successful who sort of struggle to connect with the next generation of performers. I'm thinking about someone like Bob Hope, who was an exceptionally funny and gifted comedian, and when the 60s came around, he visibly did not do as well in terms of understanding what kinds of jokes people wanted to hear or how to connect with them. I think we're seeing some of that as well, but there's no shortage of gifted, young stand-up performers or people on television who are doing remarkable things with comedy. I do think that part of what you're describing, though, is that comedy has gotten quite political. When we're looking at the kinds of, in addition to kind of late night comedy, when we're looking at, comedy on television, it often has a kind of political bent to it. I don't see that necessarily as a bad thing. I hear what you're saying, that it can definitely put certain audiences off, but comedy on the whole has always had a kind of political aspect to it, and a somewhat liberal political aspect to it as well. There have been attempts more recently to have kind of more conservative comedy. So like, if you look at Fox News or places like that, they have sort of more comedically oriented shows. I frankly can't really tell you how successful they are in terms of what they do, but I think their very presence kind of speaks to the idea that comedy itself is already something that generally speaks to a younger, more liberal audience, and that's been true for 100 years. So I don't necessarily see these changes as kind of pushing people away. I do think that, kind of coming back to our Anchorman discussion about the ways in which it's a movie that's a satire of the news media, that audiences are attracted to shows like The Daily Show or Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, not only as comedy, but also as ways to like find out about what's going on in the world, in part because the rest of the television news media has become so inhospitable, just like full of scare stories and misinformation and other stuff that doesn't sort of serve at least some of the audience's desire to find out information.
So what we're going to do is, I committed a question and a question. We want to make sure that you come by his book and he signs it, so we will have some time, because I won't let him leave. I'll chain him. I'll do some sort of comic something that he can't leave. So Mark, you will get your question, just I want to make sure we sell his books, because he came all the way up here. So, hold on one second.
I just want to make a quick comment and get your opinion. I hated the movie.
Aww.
I hated the movie because it was sort of making fun of stuff I went through in the 70s and 80s. I went through that, and most of the women my age did, and I didn't find that funny. I mean, there are some subjects that you can make comedy from. That's a terrible sentence, but you get the idea. And there are some subjects that are very close to my heart, and that one for me was just too close, because when you're the victim of sexism, a movie like this isn't so much fun. And no matter what the theme is and what the intention is, I lost it after that. So what do you think of that? I mean, just asking.
I did love when she threw the typewriter at him. That was very empowering.
And there's domestic violence at work. There's workplace violence. I didn't like that either.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is a completely legitimate point of view, and I think that any movie or any work of art is going to have a variety of responses, and your response is, every bit as legitimate as mine or anyone else's. I think what I would say is that I see this as being a movie that is satirizing what you're describing, that it's looking at the kinds of odious, unpleasant, brutal behavior that that you're describing, and undermining it or making fun of it or sort of revealing how noxious and how foolish it is, right? The characters who are espousing these ideas in the movie are not the heroes, they're idiots. And so watching them kind of have this toddler's temper tantrum at the idea of a woman emerging in their midst, I think that's part of what the movie's trying to get across. It doesn't mean that you have to like it, though. You can still hate the movie. But I do think that there's a kind of satirical aspect to it, that it's looking to take a fairly serious topic and kind of render it absurd, and by doing so, also render the ideas that underpin this kind of misogyny absurd as well.
Okay, last question. We don't want to exclude this side. And Ben, if you have a question, I will accept. No, okay, I would have been for you.
It's interesting. I'm going to somewhat piggyback on what that woman said, but from a very different perspective. I actually worked in television news in the 70s in New York City. I worked at Channel 5 WNEW, and I worked at Channel 11 WPIX, and I was the only woman in the newsroom. And I wasn't an anchor, and I wasn't really a reporter. I was sort of everybody's backup. But they sent me out on 2 stories that were clearly women's stories. One of them was a very prominent female philanthropist in New York, had just had breast cancer, and she had had reconstructive surgery, and was talking about this. So this was sort of a new topic to talk about. So they wanted a woman to go out and do it. And I interviewed her, she was lovely, and at one point she said to me, "I want you to feel my breast, my reconstructed breast." And I thought, sure. And I did, and it, you know, was weird, but whatever, we talked about it very openly. I went back, and when they aired that, they left that part out, because that was too sensitive. And then they sent me to Ward's Island, which some of you who grew up in New York may remember was really a mental institution, a mental facility at the time. And we had a tradition of going in rolling, as they called it. It was an all-male crew and a male newsroom director. He said, "I want you to go in with those cameras rolling, put microphones in people's faces and make them answer questions." So I did it. And then I was to interview a young woman who had claimed that she had been raped by some of the staff. I see her to this day. We sat outside. She sat on a stone wall swinging her legs, and she was a young woman who clearly had a lot of issues, but she told me, yes, they raped me. They came into my room, they raped me. And I thought, well, I got the story they wanted. And I went back, and her mother called the station and said, "My daughter just called me. She's very excited. She's going to be on TV. You can't air that. It will destroy her life. It will destroy my life." And so the compromise, they said to me, well, figure something out with her, because we really want to run the story. So I remember calling her and using all the sensitivity that a woman would bring, with all due respect. And I said, would it be okay if we didn't identify her and just showed her, because we had footage of her swinging her legs? And her mother said, okay. So we ran the story that way. It was not the entire story, but I felt it was equally effective. We told our story. You know, you fast forward now to this movie. We were talking beforehand. I thought this movie was so stupid when it came out. I didn't think Will Ferrell was funny. I didn't laugh. I sat here today laughing hysterically. And maybe that's a function of just being older and not being as judgmental about what's funny and what's not funny. It wasn't my kind of humor. It was stupid, but it was just funny to watch. So I thank you for introducing to us the parts of life that you just sometimes have to laugh at. It doesn't mean you agree with all of it. Certainly those were not my experiences, but they were. They were my experiences made funny. That was the point of it. When I saw Network, I didn't think that was accurate either, but I got that they were trying to portray a newsroom. So thank you for making me laugh. I just think, you know, if I can laugh in a day, it's a good day for me. So thank you all.
And one of the amazing things, as we're hearing the different conversations, and this is one of the key objectives of bringing the community together, both the Rhinebeck Reformed Church and the Jewish Federation of Dutchess County, to be able to have these dialogues, constructive, positive, sharing ideas, as we said, laughing a little, sometimes crying a little. So as I thank our author, would you like to have the final last words on any last minute thought you want to share with us?
Sure. Yeah, just in response to what you said, I very much appreciated it. And also, you know, you're definitely not the only one. I ended up talking to a number of people in the film industry who came back to the film after having gotten the first bite at it. So I interviewed someone named Michael Nathanson, who was the president of MGM in the 90s, one of the big studios. And he had gotten a look at the Anchorman script. And like I said, the initial script had been more about kind of Philadelphia anchors, and he had grown up in Philadelphia, and he went and read the script that all of his colleagues were telling him, this script is so great, you're gonna love it. And he read it and just felt like, this movie's so dumb. Like, why didn't they do any research about Philadelphia news? Like, I could have told them more. This movie, like, they didn't get the job done. And then someone else who I spoke to, you know, this movie came out like 15 years after the movie Broadcast News, which is also about television news. And so Adam McKay kept getting responses from people that basically consisted of, yeah, I see what you're going for here. You're trying to make broadcast news, but you're not good at it, and this movie is really bad, so we're gonna pass. So, I think that it's very, it makes sense to me, and you're far from the only one who maybe had their mind changed a little bit. And in part, I think it's a matter of how you're kind of approaching the movie or what you're sort of seeing as its purpose, that it's not like a straightforward representation of what television news was like in the era, but rather like a comic exaggeration of it.
So on that, if we can give Saul a big warm thank you. We appreciate you all for coming. Oblong Books, thank you for being present and sharing and selling books. So how much is the book? All right, how much is the book? Oblong, Ian?
It's 29 plus tax.
29 plus tax, a bargain, such a bargain. So stay safe, stay healthy. As we said, I don't have a copy up here, but we have the Federation Voice that comes out monthly to share with you all these different great things that we are doing with the Rhinebeck Reformed Church in the community. So sign up for the paper, sign up for our weekly email. We will be back here next month we're kicking off again the Coffee and Conversation series with Professor Bruce Chilton from Bard and the IAT and the Blue Butterfly Foundation. So look forward to that. We'll be back here, same bat time, same bat channel. Have a very blessed Sunday, and thank you all for coming.